Hey, how's everybody doing? It's Jason with Daruma Advisors. We're a small consulting firm that focuses on strategy and product in the technology arena. And today I wanted to talk to everyone a little bit about AI and really in the sense of AI for the real folks. You talk to a lot of technology people about AI, they can get very deep, they can get very passionate, a lot of opinions. But let's say, given that it's the holiday season, maybe you're going to a party and you're talking and people are asking you questions because you work in the technology arena or the business world and what's going on. So I wanted to give like a quick and dirty um, class, I guess, if you will, on an AI. The other thing I wanted to say was a lot of what I learned here came from a course I took at MIT in the executive education program called Strategic Implications of AI. It's a remote course and it's great, about 6 weeks long. I'd highly recommend it. I'll put a link to that in the comments. Okay, so at the highest level, what is AI? I mean, there's a lot of terms being thrown around, a lot of technology words being thrown around. There's chat GPT, there's machine learning, neural networks. How does it all come together and what does it really mean? Well, let's start with the very far side of this picture on the left, where it starts with a ton of data, honestly. So when you think about in previous years where you had large companies like Google and Microsoft and Facebook getting so much personal data and information from your phone, and it started to spurn concerns about privacy. Well, that data is essentially the bedrock foundation of some AI models. Additionally, there's tons of information out there from, say, machines, even common machines like elevators and drill presses. They have data coming out of them, and it's all over the place, right? So there's data everywhere. And in order to do AI well, you really need a lot of it, and you need to be able to then take that data and begin to transform it. And that's really where the AI part starts to kick in, because all of these models that are being built for AI are essentially to develop patterns. So they're looking for through the data at a very granular level. So not necessarily looking at a picture, but maybe the pixels inside a picture, just to give you an idea of how granular. And they're looking for patterns to develop an understanding of how things relate to each other, what they do, and how they move. And the truth is that the machines, depending on the level of data you have and depending on the level of infrastructure you have, the machine itself isn't able to deduce all the patterns. So there has to be a human element that gets injected into it, which is called training. And training is, in some cases, just people looking over the data and trying to make sure that the algorithms or the programs recognize the patterns better, right? So do this, don't do that. In this case, it's an exception, those types of things. So a lot of people think that these AI companies are just these giant data centers full of servers working. But in some cases, there's hundreds or thousands of people training the data in addition to the data being put into these patterns or algorithms, right? Then you get to what the output is. And the output essentially in the broadest term is a prediction. That prediction might be, hey, what's the next word in this sentence as I begin to write this document for you, like in Chat GPT? Or it's, hey, there's some sort of anomaly in this manufacturing process that I can see through the camera. So what should I do? Should I reject that part? Or should I, move it to a different area? What needs to happen in those cases? So it begins to get smart enough to make those predictions without necessarily having all the rules spelled out for them exactly, right? So it can actually do it itself, and they call it generative AI because it's able to recurse over and over and over again. So that's kind of the broad brushstrokes of it. There's really four big pieces, and the outcome everybody wants is the predictions, right? So if we move on to the next topic, it really is, okay, well, what types of things can we do with AI, right? So now I understand kind of the basics on how it works, but what can we do with it? And that's where we get into talking about different types of use cases. So one of the ones that is very commonly out there today with ChatGPT and the new stuff coming out from Google that was just announced yesterday and Microsoft stuff. It's all about content creation. So what's super about it is that there's an idea that there's a chat bot or some sort of interface, and you give that input, and it's able to take those models and predict what you're actually asking for. So it can make things like reports. I mean, it's been programmed to pass tests and answer very detailed questions. It's also able to generate really interesting artwork and designs. And then now it's starting to be used increasingly in the building of computer code. So the computers are effectively building code for other computers, which is kind of interesting. The problem with this is that the data that really came into that sphere comes from all over the place. And there's a lot of debate going on in terms of who owns what. The Hollywood writer's strike was about, okay, well, now that you have data of my image and likeness, are you going to manipulate and use that in other movies without my knowledge? Who owns that data? Who owns your image and likeness? And that's a big deal with content generation using AI. The other thing is the outcome of that would be a deep fake where somebody actually uses your name, image, or license, well, mostly image or likeness in a way that is fake, that isn't true to your standards or norms, and maybe done without your permission. Next use case is the one that I've been most interested in the last few years, which is control, which is how do we have systems become smarter and smarter and smarter such that you can actually have machines that can control themselves or machines that can control themselves better with the use of additional humans. So that's robotics, self-driving cars, self-driving trains, and things like machines, like very smart machines. So these are interesting topics, but kind of scary. People start to feel kind of Terminator movies about this, autonomous robots and things like that. The truth is that that's way off in the future, despite what you see online. The real key for this type of control applications are around safety and reliability. And in fact, AI can make some of these things more safe and more reliable, which is a really good thing. It also is useful in getting machines tuned up quicker. Then we move to monitoring, which I think is kind of one of the more established but less talked about use cases, which is you can deploy AI in such a way that it can have a huge span of control and be monitored by relatively few humans. So a great example of this would be doing facial recognition at large events to pick out people who maybe aren't allowed in the building or people who may be a threat to a large crowd of people at an event or a festival or something like that. There's also a whole slew of things that can be done with monitoring computer systems and software systems to do cybersecurity. And then, of course, I brought up an example at the beginning around quality control, also a very positive and interesting use case. Issues around this, again, when you're monitoring people and it's kind of public, you start to worry about privacy, but you also start to worry about people acting on the data in bad ways, right? So that could even include things like, deploying hack and cyber events, which is obviously not a good thing for businesses. Lastly, the one that's kind of a little bit more nascent, but also very interesting is modeling, which is, hey, now that I have this data, I could actually build a kind of virtual representation of this machine or this process, and I could begin to simulate it and see what happens when I put different types of inputs into it. So what happens when all of a sudden we increase the input on the factory line by 50%? Are things going to break down, and where are those bottlenecks? You can also use it for like business simulations, like, well, if my revenue goes up by X, what happens to the rest of my business? Will my expenses go up? Will my capital needs go up? Will I need another factory? So there's a lot of kind of business decision support stuff that can be done using AI techniques. And that's kind of still, like I said a little earlier, because people have techniques for that already, but it's still being worked on. The trick with those is really accuracy, right? You need massive data sets to do these types of simulations with any degree of accuracy. So there's a real question as to how much value you're going to get in return for collecting this data to build these models out, right? Or versus just doing it in the real world itself and taking the chance. The other thing is that there's a concern, kind of corollary to accuracy, is would these models be able to encounter something such as a black swan event? So if you're doing a simulation on pandemics, right, would it have been able to predict COVID, right? Would it have been a thing, or would it not, right? And of course, you tend to use these systems, you begin to rely on them, and there's a big question as to whether that's a good thing to rely upon, right? Because, if it can't predict those types of things, what value is there in some cases? Okay, so the big question everybody's going to ask after you give this really great explanation that's hopefully in very good layman's terms is, okay, should I be worried, right? I see a lot of things in the news. Some people say it's nothing to worry about and it's a great thing for society. Other people predict, again, science fiction movie type scenarios. neither of which are probably true. Its answers, of course, always somewhere in the middle. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, one of the biggest AI companies out there, said it was the most overhyped technology of the century. So, and I tend to believe he's right. And the reason to not be worried about it in the near term is the cost. I mean, only a few companies actually have the resources to do this extremely well. You're talking hundreds of millions to billions of dollars of infrastructure in place to actually do AI at the level that it's probably would be a threat to society of some sort, at least a threat to society in an autonomous way. Obviously, some of this data might be used, derived from models for humans to take action, and it would enable them to do things. But again, the cost of these is huge. There is always a question of accuracy. I do think that depending on the model size and the type of modeling, certainly, is it really accurate, and how much rechecking and work does it have to get done? And then anytime you start to get into this type of scale of computing and computing power, you have to start worrying about cooling, electricity, and there's a lot of environmental impact that's now coming along with data centers, spurring an entirely new branch in information technology called sustainability, right? So that's a big topic of the day, liquid cooled computers, things like that. So you go, okay, I don't have to worry about it for a couple of years, Jason. That sounds good, but what about down the road, right? What about it? And the truth is that I think that my fears are pretty muted. I wouldn't say absolutely not, because it's too hard to predict something that far down the road. But the reality is that, first off, humans and machines don't natively have trust with each other, because a lot of times humans look at a machine and think of it as a black box of magic, right? You don't know how your iPhone works. It just works, right? And I think when you start to begin to let a machine of any sort, or a computer or a software algorithm, start to dictate elements of your life that are critical, you start to really look at it and decide if you want to trust that, right? And I'd say that that's a big thing with AI, is that, I mean, even something simple like a couple of weeks ago, we were on a trip, my family, we were in the car, the GPS sent us on some crazy path that I would have never thought of in my life to save, 10 minutes of drive time or something. And I kept just looking at it going, why isn't it directing me the way that 90% of the people, this is one of those things where I just kept going, is it really right? Right. And I didn't know. I really didn't know. And frankly, that trip took so long, it probably wasn't, right? The other thing is AI is still a human-directed process. There's training, there's setup, there's all this stuff. So the thing to worry about more long-term is, as AI becomes a more powerful technology, how will people use it, especially when you start talking about governmental, military types of operations? Is this something that's going to impact that? And the last thing, which maybe is a surprise for people who know me, I'm generally one who is very anti-tech regulations, but this is a case where I actually have some great concern. And it really has to do with the pace of human change. I think what we've seen over the last 150 to 200 years, dawn of the Industrial Revolution, is that how this technology will move so fast and will change processes and businesses so quickly, more so than, say, the shift from agriculture to industrialization, that's changed from industrialization to service industry. When you start to think about the pace of human change, there's a lot of people who could potentially get left behind, creating, disastrous geopolitical effects, right? If you have an AI and all of a sudden you don't need people to do the jobs they did anymore, the economists in the aggregate level will say, well, but it's going to create an entirely new set and cast of jobs. But the fact of the matter is that if you're somebody who's maybe late in their career, you're not going to just start all over again because you were a customer service rep to learn how to train an AI. The fact is that that company's probably not going to hire you to do that. They're going to hire somebody else who has the skill set and has the understanding. So given that this technology is so profound and so quickly moving, I do think that there has to be some element of society that has to look at this from a personal viewpoint as to what happens to the people who are displaced and how do we make sure they're taken care of, versus just trusting the fact that somehow it'll all work out, which is kind of what happened in the previous generations. And I just don't think that's fair. Okay, so let me just wrap up. Hopefully, maybe this gets you through a conversation with your uncle at the Christmas table or at the synagogue at Hanukkah or whatever. Again, happy holidays. And the other thing I'll say is, check us out, Daruma Advisors. This is our YouTube channel, but you can also find us on LinkedIn. And we have a website, which is listed here on the screen. And if you like what you see, I do a video about once a week. So like, subscribe, share, whatever you like. And again, have a great day.